Joseph Augustus Zarelli, the child. Once known as the boy in the box, for more than 65 years, no one knew his name. He was known only by the object in which his body had been abandoned, the boy in the box. His photograph appeared on hundreds of thousands of posters. Detectives followed countless leads. His remains were exhumed more than once as investigators waited for science to provide an answer that traditional police work could not. Generations of investigators retired without learning who he was. Then, in December 2022, Philadelphia authorities finally gave America's unknown child, the boy in the box, his name. Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was 4 years old. Identifying Joseph solved one of the case's greatest mysteries, but not the most important one. Who killed him? Who placed his body in a cardboard box and left him beside a rural road? How could a 4-year-old child disappear without anyone coming forward to report him missing? And now that investigators know his identity, can they finally reconstruct the short life that ended so violently in February 1957? I'm Alan Key, a former major crimes detective and current polygraph examiner and author, and this is Cold Cases with Alan Key. On this program, we separate established facts from fiction. We examine the evidence, the investigative decisions, and the forensic science that may finally solve cases once thought impossible. Most importantly, we remember the victim. For decades, this child was known only by the nickname created from the circumstances in which he was found, the boy in the box. Today, we will call him by his name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The discovery. On February 25, 1957, a young man was traveling through the Fox Chase section of northeast Philadelphia. At the time, the area was far less developed than it is today. There were wooded lots, open fields, scattered homes, and narrow roads. Near Susquehanna Road, the man entered a brush-covered area while checking animal traps. There, he noticed a large cardboard box. Inside was the body of a small boy. The man did not immediately report what he had seen, reportedly because he feared police attention concerning the traps. A college student later came upon the same location and discovered the body. After initially leaving the area, he contacted police. Officers responded on February 26th. The child was unclothed and had been wrapped in a plaid blanket before being placed inside the cardboard box. The box had originally held a baby bassinet sold by J.C. Penney. Investigators estimated that the child was between 4 and 6 years old. He was small and severely underweight. His body displayed numerous injuries. Authorities concluded that he had been beaten and that his death was a homicide involving blunt force trauma. His hair appeared to have been cut shortly before or possibly after his death. Loose pieces of hair remained on his body. His fingernails had also been trimmed. He had several scars that investigators hoped might be recognized by a doctor, relative, or caregiver. But there was no identification in the box. There was no clothing carrying a name. There was no missing child report that immediately matched him. Police now had a murdered child, an abandonment site, and a collection of physical evidence. What they did not have was his name. A child no one claimed. Investigators believed that identifying the child would quickly lead them to his killer. They took his fingerprints, photographed his face, and circulated descriptions to law enforcement agencies. Police checked reports of missing and runaway children. They contacted hospitals, doctors, schools, orphanages, and child welfare organizations. The Philadelphia Inquirer helped print hundreds of thousands of flyers, featuring a post-mortem photograph of the child. The flyers were distributed throughout the Philadelphia region and even included with residential gas bills. It was an extraordinary publicity effort for 1957. Police Academy recruits searched the area around the discovery site. Investigators examined the cardboard box, the blanket, and objects found nearby. The bassinet box was reportedly traced to a store in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania. However, records that might have identified the purchaser were incomplete, and the store had sold several similar bassinets. The blanket was common enough that investigators could not connect it to one household. Objects recovered near the scene included clothing and personal items, but none could be conclusively linked to the child or his killer. Police displayed the boy's photograph publicly, hoping that someone would recognize his face. But no parent came forward. No relative identified him. No neighbor called to say that a child had suddenly disappeared from a nearby home. That silence created one of the most troubling questions in the case. How could a child live for approximately 4 years and then vanish without anyone reporting him missing? A 4-year-old normally has contact with more than one person. There may be doctors, neighbors, extended family members, shopkeepers, babysitters, or other children. Someone should have known Joseph existed. Yet for more than 6 decades, no one was able or willing to publicly connect his face with his name. What the evidence suggested. The condition of Joseph's body gave investigators several possible directions. He appeared malnourished, suggesting prolonged neglect or deprivation rather than a single violent incident. His injuries indicated repeated or severe physical abuse. The fact that his body may have been washed, his hair cut, and his nails trimmed raised questions about what happened before he was abandoned. Was someone attempting to remove identifying evidence? Was the haircut intended to change his appearance? Was someone cleaning him after his death? Or had some of that grooming taken place while he was still alive? The box itself was large enough to transport his body and could have been placed into a car. That suggested the person responsible probably had access to a vehicle. The discovery location was relatively isolated but still accessible from the road. This was not necessarily a place chosen for permanent concealment. The box was visible enough that hunters, trappers, or people walking through the brush could eventually find it. That may indicate haste. It may indicate that the offender did not have the physical ability, tools, or time to bury the child. Or it may have been selected by someone familiar with the area who believed the box would remain hidden. The body had reportedly been at the location for only a short period before it was found. That narrowed the possible disposal window. However, investigators still did not know where Joseph had been killed. The place where a body is found is not always the place where the murder occurred. In this case, the box and surrounding woods appeared to be an abandonment site. The primary crime scene may have been a house, apartment, institution, or other location somewhere else in the Philadelphia region. Without finding that scene, investigators were missing potential blood evidence, fingerprints, witnesses, and other clues that could identify the offender. Early theories. As the investigation continued, police received thousands of tips and developed numerous theories. Some people believed Joseph may have lived at a foster home located not far from where his body was found. This possibility, or the possibility that he had been adopted, threw doubt on the question as to whether his parents were responsible. An employee of the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office named Remington Bristow became deeply committed to solving the case. He continued investigating long after the original inquiry had slowed. Bristow suspected that the child might have been connected to a nearby foster home. He noted that a bassinet similar to the type once contained in the box was reportedly seen at the property. Blankets observed there were also compared to the blanket found with the boy. However, authorities examined the foster home theory and did not find sufficient evidence to establish that Joseph had lived there or that members of the household had killed him. Another widely discussed account came from a woman identified publicly only as Martha or M. She told investigators that her mother had obtained a young boy and kept him inside their home. She claimed the child was abused, killed, and later placed inside a box. Some details in her account appeared to resemble facts from the case. However, investigators were unable to independently verify her central claims. People who had known the family reportedly denied seeing a young boy living in the home. Her story attracted enormous public attention, but it did not produce an arrest. There were theories involving kidnapped children, traveling workers, private adoptions, and children raised under different identities. Investigators compared the unknown boy with missing children from across the country. Again and again, the comparisons failed. The problem with a famous unidentified victim case is that it attracts both genuine witnesses and people who are mistaken, confused, or just seeking attention. A detailed story can sound convincing without being true. Investigators must look for corroboration. Does the person know information that was never released publicly? Can records confirm that the witness was in the right place at the right time? Do names, addresses, and dates match? Does physical evidence support the account? Without that independent confirmation, a theory remains only a theory. America's unknown child. Joseph was initially buried in a potter's field, which is a public burial ground for destitute, unknown, unclaimed, or indigent people. His grave was marked with a simple stone identifying him as an unknown boy. But he was not forgotten. Police officers, detectives, and members of the community continued visiting his grave. In 1998, his remains were exhumed so investigators could obtain DNA. At that time, DNA technology was far more limited than it is today. Scientists developed genetic information, but the profile did not immediately identify him. Joseph was reburied at Ivy Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. This time, his marker read, "America's Unknown Child." The phrase reflected both the tragedy of his case and the determination of those who refused to allow him to disappear completely. Retired Philadelphia detective Thomas Augustine spent decades working on the investigation. Members of Philadelphia's VDOC Society, an organization of forensic professionals and former law enforcement investigators who examine difficult cold cases, also studied the evidence. Forensic artists created facial reconstructions showing how the child might have appeared in life. Investigators pursued new leads whenever they emerged. But for decades, the most basic question remained unanswered. Who was he? Traditional DNA databases depend largely on direct matches. If an unknown victim's DNA is entered into a law enforcement database, investigators may identify that person only if the individual, or sometimes a close qualifying relative, already has DNA in the system. Joseph had no direct match. But a new method would eventually change the investigation. Appreciate why identification matters. Identifying Joseph gave detectives something they had never possessed before, a family structure. Investigators could now examine where his parents lived, who knew them, and where Joseph may have spent his life. They could search birth records, hospital records, property information, and old addresses. They could identify relatives, neighbors, family friends, and possible caregivers. They could ask whether anyone remembered seeing a small boy in a particular household between 1953 and 1957. They could determine whether Joseph had siblings and whether anyone remembered conversations about a child who disappeared. Identification also changed the meaning of older evidence. A location that once seemed unrelated might now connect to an address associated with Joseph's family. An old statement might be re-examined in light of his true age and background. A witness who could not recognize a postmortem photograph might remember the name of a household or family member. However, identifying a victim after 65 years creates enormous obstacles. Many of the people who may have known Joseph are dead. Records may have been destroyed. Homes have changed owners or been demolished. Vehicles no longer exist. Physical evidence may have deteriorated. Even people who are still alive may have only childhood memories of events that occurred in the 1950s. A murder prosecution requires more than identifying people who had access to the victim. Investigators must connect a particular person to the violence, the box, the blanket, or the abandonment site. They must distinguish family secrecy from criminal responsibility. The fact that someone was biologically related to Joseph does not mean that person harmed him. Authorities have not publicly named Joseph's killer, and no relative should be accused without reliable evidence. From an investigative standpoint, Joseph's identification demonstrates the importance of preserving evidence. In 1957, detectives could not have imagined forensic genetic genealogy. DNA profiling itself would not become a practical investigative tool for decades. Yet evidence was retained. Joseph's remains were preserved. Photographs, reports, and physical items survived long enough for later investigators to apply technology that did not exist when the crime occurred. That is one of the most important lessons in cold case work. An investigator is not preserving evidence only for today's laboratory. The evidence may be tested by scientists who have not been born yet, using methods that have not been invented yet. The case also demonstrates why identifying an unknown victim is often essential to solving the homicide. Victimology asks who the victim was, where the person lived, who had access to the person, and what relationships surrounded the victim. For 65 years, investigators could not conduct complete victimology because they did not know Joseph's identity. Now, after his identification, they can ask, where did Joseph live? Who cared for him? Who last saw him alive? Was he hidden from neighbors and extended family? Did anyone notice injuries or malnutrition? Did someone believe he had been sent away, adopted, or placed in an institution? Who had access to a vehicle and to the area where the body was found? Who purchased or possessed the bassinet box? Did the blanket come from Joseph's home? And did anyone make statements after February 1957 suggesting knowledge of his death? These questions may never produce a prosecutable case, but they can still establish what happened. Solving a homicide is not only about arresting someone. It is also about restoring the historical truth and giving a victim the dignity of being known. Remembering Joseph. On January 13, 2023, what would have been Joseph's 71st birthday, a new grave marker bearing his real name was unveiled at Ivy Hill Cemetery. For decades, people had visited a child whose identity they did not know. Now they could speak his name. Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Born January 13, 1953. Found February 25, 1957. 4 years old. The identification changed how the public should think about the case. The boy in the box is the name of an investigation. It should not be the identity of the child. Joseph was not a box, a police photograph, or a mystery created for public entertainment. He was a little boy. He experienced hunger, neglect, and violence that no child should ever have to endure. Somewhere in his short life, he may also have experienced moments of comfort or happiness. Perhaps someone held him as an infant. Perhaps he had a favorite toy, a favorite food, or a person he trusted. Those details have largely been lost, but his name has been restored. And with that name comes another chance to find the truth. The identification of Joseph Augustus Zarelli proves that a case is not necessarily hopeless because it is old. For 65 years, detectives could not answer the simplest question: who was the child? Then science advanced. Evidence was tested again. Genealogists built family trees. Investigators found the birth record. And America's unknown child finally became Joseph. The remaining question is whether the same combination of science, persistence, and traditional police work can identify his killer. Someone knew that Joseph disappeared in 1957. Someone may have been told that he went to live with another family. Someone may remember a sudden change inside a household. Someone may have heard a confession or a carefully constructed lie. Even a childhood memory could help investigators understand where Joseph lived and who controlled his life. Anyone with genuine information should provide it directly to the Philadelphia Police Department. Do not accuse living relatives online. Do not confuse family connection with guilt. And do not allow speculation to become a substitute for evidence. Joseph Augustus Zarelli waited more than 6 decades to have his name restored. He is no longer America's unknown child, but he is still a murder victim awaiting justice. I'm Alan Key, and this has been Cold Cases with Alan Key. For more respectful, evidence-based examinations of unsolved crimes, subscribe to the podcast and share this episode. You can also find my book, Cold Cases, The Most Infamous Unsolved Murders and the Science That Could Solve Them Today, available through Amazon. Until next time, remember, a victim's name matters. Preserving evidence matters. And no matter how much time has passed, the truth still matters.